So the sellout, Janet Yellen, the slave of the international bankers who own the Federal Reserve, of which she chairs, has been spewing the words negative interest rates from her puckery little mouth. You know Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen. Now talking about negative interest rates, saying that they would consider them if the economy soured. Guess what, Janet Yellen? The economy has soured. It soured in 2008. But, oh, perhaps you didn't know that. You weren't the chair then. Barack Obama is saying right now that the strongest, most durable economy in the world is the United States. He said that during the State of the Union address recently, just last month. This is February 26, 2016. He said that in January. He's a liar. A lot of you already know that he's a liar. He is not working for your interests at all. Negative interest rate policy was a dud, according to Zero Hedge. Are central banks out of options? A growing number of investors are beginning to realize that central banks are effectively out of ammo for now. Last week I noted that the Bank of Japan's implementation of NIRP only generated a brief rally in Japanese stocks. That rally has since been obliterated as Japanese stocks collapsed 10%. Here are some headlines. HSBC, Sweden's experience shows negative rates haven't worked. The monetary madness that's pushing Japanese bonds negative. Negative interest rates can hurt global stocks. Banks drink from NIRP's poisoned well. So, is it going to work? Isn't it going to work? I think they're going to do it. When they talk about things like negative interest rates, they are going to do it. What happened to Japan when they had their negative interest rates announced? According to Zero Hedge again, it may have started a silent bank run. Indeed, safe sales soared in Japan as people moved to store cash amid negative interest rate turmoil. So obviously what this means is people heard about the fact that the banks were going to steal their money when they needed to do so, which is coming up soon. And they went out and bought safes so they could store their money at home, which you should be doing too. You remember this criminal, Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan CEO, who stole billions of dollars from taxpayers? That would be you. Well, Jamie Dimon, by the way, he also got a $20 million package for that, and his daughter, Laura, wants criminals brought to justice. But Daddy-O here is not one of the 6 most notorious criminals who aren't facing the justice they deserve, probably because she was dropped on her head at birth. I digress. Jamie Dimon says virtual currency will be stopped. What he said actually was virtual currency, where it's called a Bitcoin versus a US dollar, that's going to be stopped. No government will ever support a virtual currency that goes around borders and doesn't have the same controls. It's not going to happen. Did you hear that? No government will ever support a virtual currency that goes around borders and doesn't have the same controls. Controls. Do you get it? The government must maintain that you use their system of fiat currency that is backed by zero value. The Federal Reserve note, which is what is stated on your money, is a term used to describe the paper currency circulated in the United States. These Federal Reserve notes are printed by the U.S. Treasury, printed on a machine, at the instruction of the Federal Reserve Bank members, who are international banking cartel gangsters, who also act as the clearinghouse for local banks that need to increase or reduce their supply of cash on hand. Prior to 1971, any Federal Reserve note issued was theoretically backed by an equivalent amount of gold held by the U.S. Treasury. However, under President Nixon, the gold standard was officially abandoned, creating a fiat currency. In other words, Federal Reserve notes were no longer backed by hard assets. That's right, they confiscated gold. Yes, they paid the people for it in the 1930s. And then they, very conveniently for them, increased the value of gold, which could have been your increase if you had held on to it. See here, Federal Reserve note. I want you to listen to this.
Do you know the greatest period of economic growth in U.S. history is when there was no central bank? The Federal Reserve is designed to be a perpetual debt machine. It's to trap countries. Since the Federal Reserve was established about 100 years ago, the U.S. national debt has gotten more than 5,000 times larger. And what's very interesting, and maybe a lot of people don't know this, when the Federal Reserve came into being, the federal income tax was established the exact same year because they needed this to pay off all this debt. This is all part of the same system. Since the Federal Reserve was created, the U.S. dollar has lost 98% of its value. Since President Nixon took us off the gold standard, the dollar has lost 83% of its value. So, what do we know about the Federal Reserve? We know that we don't need it. It doesn't give the people anything. Actually, it takes away their wealth. It strips them of the purchasing power of currency. And our founding fathers, they warned us of this. Actually, Thomas Jefferson once stated that if you could just add one more amendment to the U.S. Constitution, it would be to ban all government borrowing. And I agree with that. So Congress does have the power to shut down the Federal Reserve at any time. But right now, most of our politicians fully endorse the current system. And unless we make a complete change, this system is going to stay the way it is. Now the question is, why would they endorse this system unless the Federal Reserve somehow, some way, is giving these government officials, government employees, free money to keep them in line? Because why else would they keep them? What would be one of the reasons?
So indeed, the politicians aren't going to do anything about the Federal Reserve because they're all owned, bought and paid for by the owners of the Federal Reserve. We are too fragile fiscally as well as psychologically. Our economies, cultures, and politics are still paying a heavy price, or policies are still paying a heavy price for the Great Recession. Another collapse, especially were to be accompanied by a fresh banking bailout by the taxpayer, would trigger a cataclysmic, uncontrollable backlash. The world can't afford another financial crash. It could destroy capitalism as we know it. I think capitalism is already under the gun. China banks may lose 5 times U.S. subprime losses in credit crisis. All these terms, subprime, what does subprime mean? Subprime is a classification of borrowers with a tarnished or limited credit history. Lenders will use a credit scoring system to determine which loans a borrower may qualify for. Subprime loans carry more credit risk and as such will carry higher interest rates as well. Approximately 25% of mortgage originations are classified as subprime. So these are banks that loan money at high interest rates to people who can't afford it. Then they go out and they buy a house that they can't afford because these people don't care about you. They don't care about your future. A towering bond trade has been quietly falling apart. Quietly. Of course it's quietly falling apart because mainstream media does not report on anything important, on anything that you truly need to know to protect yourself. Remember, don't ever forget, Fox won a lawsuit in a court of law to misinform the public. I love this word misinform. It's a very pretty euphemism for lie. Restaurant Performance Index, operator sales outlook at 2-year low. Caterpillar restructuring leads to consolidation layoffs in East Peoria. Reconstruction, they're restructuring. This is because they are broke. JCPenney lays off 300 in Plano, 9% of its headquarters jobs. In 2012, Kohl's was sinking. In 2013, Kohl's is to lay off 67 as it outsources accounts payable. Here's another problem: outsourcing jobs to foreign countries. Do you ever call customer service for a company and you get an Indian person on the phone? No offense to Indian people, but they are not in America. And now Kohl's has slumping stock prices and the directors are considering taking the company private. This economic collapse will trigger a stock market crash. We are in a global economic collapse, and it is going to trigger a stock market crash. The central bank fueled recovery is officially over. Central banks propped up the financial markets for 6 years, but the money was spent on financialization and accounting gimmicks, buybacks. That is, it didn't get into the global economy in a useful way. Corporate capital expenditures, job hires, etc. As a result, the global economy never really hit liftoff. Perhaps that's because, like Northern Trust Bank, that received $1.6 billion of government bailout funds through lavish parties and sponsored golf tournaments with their money. Your money. You threw their lavish party. You sponsored their golf tournament. Something very disturbing spotted in a Morgan Stanley presentation, with central bankers losing credibility left and right and failing outright to boost the wealth effect no matter what they throw at it. The next big question is, when will central planners around the world unveil the cashless society which is necessary and sufficient condition to a regime of global negative interest rate policy? And while in recent days we have seen op-eds both by Bloomberg and FT urging the banning of cash, the most disturbing development we have seen yet in the push for a cashless society has come from the following slide in a Morgan Stanley presentation, one in which the bank head of EMEA Equity Research, Juan Van Steenis, pointed out the following. We should move quickly to a cashless economy so that we could introduce negative rates well below 1%. Do you get what this means? Let's force people to have all their money in the bank so we have more of it to steal from them. That is exactly what that means. Sweden is developing the world's first cashless society. Establishment pushing cashless society to control humanity. This is why they are now talking about killing off $100 bills and $500 or 500 euro notes. You should also know that U.S. military funded study spots future protesters via Twitter. They watch you, they listen to you. This Twitter is not for you, it is for them. They see a trend of you protesting government policies, and oops, there goes your Twitter, and oops, there goes your debit card working at the ATM machine. And it's not just America, it's not just Japan. Experts warn Australia is in one of the biggest housing bubbles in history as they go undercover to expose mortgage brokers' shocking and risky tactics. Remember the housing bubble of 2008 in America that set off that crash? That's right. And one more thing.